Welcome. It's Facts You Don't Know. If it's your first time here and you want to find out new facts that will definitely make you smarter and more, well, and first make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss anything.
He fell in love with his maid, but is horrified when he accidentally discovers what she was hiding. Friends falling in love is one of the most beautiful stages that human beings can live. This is the story of Don Luis, a man who tries to give himself a second chance at love, even if it means trusting another person to achieve it. It was already 11:20 at night, and in the gloom of the corridor of that cozy house was Don Luis, an elderly man who had already gone through a lot in his life. How could time have passed so quickly, I ask? At just 18 years old, that now old and finished man had come out ahead with only a few coins in his pocket, a hungry stomach, and an entrepreneurial idea. Over the years, he'd met a wonderful woman who supported him unconditionally, even when she had to stop buying the dresses that she so yearned for. She looked from the windows in the street to the city where they lived, and the one who walked so much by his hand for 40 long years. April 27th was the saddest day of his life, because from that same corridor he could see how little by little his beloved companion faded, for which he did not hesitate to move heaven and earth to save her. When Don Luis realized that his beloved wife was in poor health, he hired the best doctors in the country and brought them to the door of his house. Nothing was going to take his beloved Lillian from him, and she deserved the best care, of course. This is how Evelyn came into her humble home, a humble girl with pale complexion who had helped an acquaintance of hers in the care of her sick mother with only 27 years old. It seemed like a blessing in that house. She saw to it that her wife was clean and well cared for. She would cook dinner and make them laugh. But as the days passed, Lillian's smile faded, and she no longer had any more strength to get up. Thank Mr. I have Evelyn to help me through the entire process, Don Luis thought, as he looked at the same room in which his wife had spent her last days. Now, 3 months later, completely remodeled and smelling of flowers, she gave thanks to the much-loved Evelyn, who, thank heaven, had agreed to stay by his side to help her manage the great house. If it wasn't for her, he'd have left without looking back, he thought. The food she prepared was delicious, the house was impeccable, and the clothes that he was wearing were clean. He could not complain of the great blessing of dear Evelyn, other than that lately it had become the joy of that lonely house. The girl had been well received there. At first they had installed on the same side of the employer's house, but little by little Don Luis had given him the confidence to move elsewhere, and he'd been allowed to redecorate the room in which his wife had spent the last few days. Evelyn, she's the new boss, some murmured among themselves. When they were in the corridors of that house, Evelyn came to hear them from time to time, when they believed that she'd left that place. The girl walked differently. Faced there, she looked different. She was no longer the same shy, pale-skinned girl who'd come to that house. Don Luis had seen fit to bring her one or the other little gift from time to time, who was returning from his walk through the city. Now she was wearing new dresses from the most expensive shop windows in the place. "The most beautiful shoes I've seen," said Maria, one of the younger employees. And the jewels of the landlady, Petronilla, the oldest employee, commented. Don Luis began to see Evelyn walk through the corridors in the same delicate way as he walked his beloved Lillian, and he remembered the day that which so much emotion they went to recognize his long-awaited home, in which he had finally been able to acquire after so much effort. Sure that it was not exactly that big house they were in, but a smaller one in a more affluent neighborhood with a small garden full of flowers, and that the two of them had planted with so much love. The sound of heels brought them out of their memories. Evelyn had approached them in the magnificent dress he'd given her. She looked just gorgeous, and she was ready for the dance that night that she'd been invited to. The months passed, and Evelyn became her right hand. She discovered this very sweet girl was also very good with finances. She discovered one night that she was reneging on an account she had to review. She squared everything smoothly and made her work much easier. She'd become essential to him, and was very attentive. Every night she brought him dinner to the study, and they had dinner together. One night, after returning from the Mahavira dinner with her, Don Luis felt a terrible tiredness, coming to wake up in his study. No one realized until the next day that the oldest employee found him and desperately asked for help. At all times, Evelyn was by her side, holding her hand and helping her in everything. With the same tenderness as she had cared for her wife, he was very grateful to have her. As the days passed in Don Luis's health, he did not seem to improve, so he had to make a very important decision, and which he'd thought about a long time ago. He had to modify his will, which he had drawn up many years ago, and at that time his beloved wife, Lillian, was the absolute heir. Unfortunately, this beautiful couple had not had children, so Don Luis meditated all night. Upon awakening, a beautiful smile gave him good morning, the same one that every night gave him a tender kiss on the forehead. He had definitely decided Evelyn would have her entire fortune. Unfortunately, Don Luis worsens, and he asks as a last will that his doctor and lawyer be present to dictate his will. Evelyn, desperate and crying, called the doctor, who happened to be the same who had treated Don Luis's wife and had become friends of the family. Along with him, the lawyer who had accompanied him for many years. The silence in the room was uncomfortable and sad. Don Luis seemed to not give more, but even so he got up from the bed in which he was indicating with his hand that he would begin. The lawyer began to read the will of that old man, where he left all of his inheritance to the much-loved Evelyn, she opening her eyes to hear the quantities and properties that she left in her care. Then she turned to look with total admiration at Don Luis and whispered a thank you. And she looked back at her with a small smile in front of everyone present. She asked in a soft voice, "My dear, I would like you to give me one last sip of that maple syrup you gave me every night before bed." The girl was paralyzed. She wasn't counting on him asking for that syrup right now. Don Luis had asked many times the recipe of that forthcoming syrup that had been given for months, and it was the same that had been given to his wife. But she had always found a way to keep it from him. Evelyn's nervousness was evident. The girl slowly gets up and goes to the drawer where she kept so much mentioned syrup. She serves Don Luis a spoonful under the gaze of that doctor and lawyer. "It's an old maple syrup recipe from his family," Don Luis tells the doctor. "Yes, it has calming properties. You know it well, Louise," Evelyn responded immediately with a nervous tone. "She prepares it herself," Don Luis said, and Evelyn, desperate, brings the spoon to the man's mouth. Don Luis instinctively spits out that syrup and without further ado immediately gets up from the bed, snatching the bottle from the girl's hand. Anger floods his face. How could I be so careless? The two men in the room are witness to everything. Don Luis argues with the girl, and finally I saw Evelyn's true face. She had managed to deceive him and had been giving him that syrup for months with the excuse that it would calm him after the loss of his wife. But he had noticed that the happy syrup left him dizzy in the mornings and made him very nauseous, so he decided to stop taking it so as to not hurt her. Every night he pretended to take a sip of that syrup that she gave her so insistently. Little by little he was able to realize the reason for his actions. Evelyn, when discovered, began to cry. Don Luis did not look at her anymore and handed that bottle with the syrup to the doctor, who immediately took it to a laboratory to do many studies where they effectively determined that it contained a toxic substance that could cause serious consequences and continue to be taken in large quantities until death. And it could cause it to become an extremely volatile chemical which became indecipherable in the human body. That same night, Evelyn, the tender and delicate girl who had lived for almost a year in Don Luis's house, was thrown out the door and was found to be guilty in front of a court of law. Don Luis remembered through the same streets that his wife also walked many years ago, remembering the joy that characterized her and imagined her dressed in those costumes that were seen in the windows, turning to him and saying that she did not need more than his company to be happy. In that moment, he realized that nothing and no one could replace true love. He let out a big sigh with tears in his eyes. He repeated the words of those days, "Forgive me, my love. Rest in peace." Friends, we ask you, do you like the video? What would you have done in Don Luis's place? Leave us your opinions in the comments section so that we can all read it. Thanks for watching. Please like and share the video in social networks. We'll be right back to you as fast as we can.